Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Well, good news is I don't have tzaraat. The bad news is I'm not sure about COVID. So we're sort of waiting, and we're in a bit of an in-between quarantine. Miriam unfortunately tested positive, and the kids and I did not, but there are some symptoms. So we got another test just to be sure. It's possible there's a cold going around, and we have that, and Miriam has COVID. But out of an abundance of caution, I am home across the street today, and I've been enjoying the simcha from my home on our flat screen here, a reminder of my gratitude to Janet Horn and Alan Usby for their generosity in sponsoring our streaming services, something that we were able to do before COVID and has really served us well during this time. I also just want to say, echoing Rav Tyler's comments, that Paige and Madison, you did an extraordinary job today. I'm so proud of you. I really enjoyed each of your Divrei Torah. You did an excellent job reading Torah and Haftarah. Madison, don't tell me I haven't done the Wordle yet. I do it after Shabbos. But I'm excited, really excited for this achievement in your lives as young Jewish people. And Mazel Tov as well to Brian and Andrea and to Ella and your entire family. Today is Shabbat Hagadol. And each year, it's the Shabbat immediately preceding Pesach. Contrary to popular belief, it's not called this because it's the day rabbis traditionally give long sermons, as Rav Tyler alluded to earlier. It's most likely a reference to the Haftarah that we heard chanted beautifully this morning by our Benot Mitzvah. And you may have heard at the end of the Haftarah that it talks about the Yom Adonai Gadol V'Norah. At the end, it's probably that Gadol, maybe because Shabbat HaNorah, the terrible Shabbat, just didn't stick. Suffice it to say, it is true that in a time when rabbis played primary roles as scholars and dayanim, legal decisors, but not pastors or preachers, pre-Pesach was to rabbis what tax season is to CPAs. Even today, I tend to field a good number of questions about Passover observance. Which foods have a hechsher? How to kosher certain utensils? Should Ashkenazi vegetarian Jews eat kidneyot? Wouldn't the world be a better place if instead of targeting Israel, people could boycott those Joyva orange ring gels? I gotta say, that's a boycott that I could get behind. But today, instead of focusing on cleaning and koshering and hating on the grossest Passover foods, I'd like to take this opportunity to draw our attention to our spiritual Pesach preparations. The Chag that begins a week from yesterday is not only the most popular Jewish observance, but certainly among the most important from a theological and historical point of view. The Exodus is, as theologian Neil Gilman described, our foundational myth. At the Seder and in the Torah passages which refer to these events, we tell this core Jewish narrative. We were slaves, God redeemed us, we wandered in the wilderness, we received the Torah, eventually we would arrive to the promised land. In fact, every year at the Seder, we make clear that this is not simply an historical event. In fact, whether it's entirely historically accurate as delineated in the Bible isn't really the point. This is our collective Jewish story, not simply an event of the past, but an eternal wormhole through which we transport ourselves into the ancient and ongoing journey of our people. B'chol dor vador, chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim. We say in every generation, it's incumbent upon each of us to view ourselves as if we personally went forth from Egypt. Rabbi Ira Stone suggests that Professor Gilman's legacy is his ability to craft language to describe the intersection of the divine and the holy with our actual lived experiences. Stone calls these culturally conditioned vocabularies of the sacred that served both to carry the knowledge of this reality from generation to generation and to provide pathways by which individuals might seek this experience in the course of their individual journey toward meaningful lives. It's meaningful lives that we're all seeking, right? Even those of us who worry about expunging every morsel of chametz from our homes are doing so because the fastidiousness of Passover prep serves to focus our attention on the holiday's purpose, which in turn can give our lives a sense of purpose. The story of Pesach is perhaps the greatest story ever told. Richard Elliott Friedman, who joined us as a scholar last Pesach, finds validity in the Exodus narrative, in part because what people in their right mind would make up such a story. Our formation in the crucible of Egyptian slavery becomes our salvation only because we're willing to look deeply into that sordid past, to not shy away from our painful history, but to learn from it, to grow from it, to become better people because of it. According to our sages, that story can be boiled down to one simple Hebrew phrase, matchil bignut umesayem b'shevach, begin with disgrace and end with glory. This sentence at first appears in the 2nd century Mishnah, and the point seems to be a pedagogic one. Lefi da'ato shel ben aviv milamdo. According to the intelligence and the ability of the son, his father teaches him about the Exodus, says the Mishnah. He begins with the Jewish people's disgrace and concludes with their glory. And what's the text the parent teaches the child? It's the formula recited at the Bikurim, the first fruit ceremony. Here's the formula from Deuteronomy 26. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to God, the God of our ancestors, and Hashem heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. Adonai freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents, bringing us to this place and giving us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. What's the point here? To tell the story of redemption and connect that with an expression of gratitude to God for the land's bounty through the Bikurim offering. Wherefore, I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, Adonai, have given me. You shall leave it before your God, Adonai Elohim, and bow low before Adonai Elohim. You get the basic idea. This is our narrative. Over and over again, we express our personal and collective gratitude for redemption, for freedom, for self-determination and expression in our own land. This is a responsibility for parents to teach their children. But the approach to telling that story comes with great flexibility. Teach your children in the way that they best learn. The lesson is the important thing, not the methodology, which is why I think there is so much creativity brought to bear at the Seder, why there are countless versions of the Haggadah and new ones every year, because telling the story is only half the story. How we tell the story is just as important. But I want to return to the Mishnah, because the Gemara, the Talmud, does something interesting with this earlier source. It asks a question: what exactly does it mean to begin with disgrace and end with praise? And two rabbis disagree as to the nature of this progression. And I believe this debate points us toward the ultimate question of our spiritual preparedness for Pesach and the work of this Shabbat Haggadah. Here's the sugya, the brief passage from the Talmud. My bignut. What is disgrace? What best signifies degradation? Rav Amar, mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avotenu. Rav says we begin with the statement, in the beginning our ancestors were idolaters. Ushmuel Amar avadim hayinu. And Shmuel says, begin with, we were slaves. What's really at the heart of the disagreement between Rav and Shmuel, two great Babylonian sages of the 2nd and 3rd centuries? Rav's position seems a bit more familiar. In the Magid section in our Haggadah, there's a midrash soon after the text brings Rav's statement, in the beginning, our ancestors were idolaters. Vihi Sha'amda, you may be familiar with, teaches that in every generation, God must rescue us because tragically, in every generation, there are those who seek to destroy us. The lengthy midrash then does something novel with the Deuteronomy text of the first fruits. Whereas in the original passage, Arami Oved Avi almost certainly refers to Jacob, as in my father was a fugitive Aramean, the Midrash recasts the Aramean as Lavan, Jacob's devious uncle. And the verb Oved, instead of wandering or fugitive, becomes destroy. Go forth and learn, says the Haggadah, what Lavan the Aramean tried to do to our forefather Jacob. For Pharaoh's decree was only against the males, while Lavan tried to completely wipe us out. So, what fundamentally is the difference between Rav's position and Shmuel's? What does it matter if the Genut, the disgrace, is about idolatry or about slavery? Rav's position is about us, who we were, what we did. Shmuel is interested rather in what was done to us. Rav suggests we come from tainted stock, unsavory origins. Shmuel wants us to confront our history of trauma. Both Rav and Shmuel say we should be mindful of our past in all its complexity, but here's the rub, my friends. They do so for very different reasons. Rav wants us to reject our past. Shmuel wants us to embrace our experience of slavery, to internalize it. Why do I draw that conclusion? Because of what happens next in the Talmud. There's a brief story included about Rav Nachman, who, quote, said to his servant Daru, a slave who is freed by his master, who gives him gold and silver, what should the slave say to him? Daru said to him, he must thank and praise his master. He said to him, if so, you have exempted us from reciting the questions of Manishtana. Why is this night different? As you have stated, the essence of the Seder tonight is the implication. Rav Nachman immediately began to recite Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves. First of all, you might be wondering why I say the story of Rav Nachman is illustrative of Shmuel's position. The reason is that Rav Nachman was Shmuel's student, and Shmuel and Rav were adversaries, frenemies. The story's purpose in the Talmud is to drive home Shmuel's argument over Rav's and to give it texture. But secondly, there's something revelatory to this tale, because the plain response of a simple servant, remember in Hebrew, the words for servant and slave are identical. It supplants the need for the entire four questions portion of the Seder. Daru comes to the rescue. It's as if the Talmud is saying, when we ask and then listen to the words of the other, a person who may have a real and present experience of oppression, our empathy becomes our teacher just as much as our interlocutor. At his core, Rav is suspicious of the other because he aligns Genut, disgrace, with idolatry, which is one of our chief Jewish no-nos. Shmuel may be suspicious of the oppressor, but not the servant, the slave, the oppressed. Instead, he invites us to move along an axis migenut lashevach, not from embarrassment about our past to a sort of monotheistic triumphalism, but from attentiveness to the experience of suffering toward gratitude for our freedom. When we follow the path of Shmuel and the story of his student Rav Nachman, the past becomes prologue for the story that we must write. Avadim Hayinu is an invitation to empathy, a call to greater understanding, both of our own past, the good parts and the bad, but of a different sort of shared future. Why begin with disgrace and end with exaltation? Because our story is at once only ours and not wholly unique. Because suffering exists then and now, here and there. Because Passover is a time to rejoice in all that's possible for ourselves, for others, and for the world. Shabbat Shalom, and a Zisen Pesach to all.